Okay, so we had left off last week with two topics I want to cover tonight, but let's we'll go through both of them. One of them is the concept of Pareve. What's and just so you know, it's a funny, because it's a pretty complicated and involved concept. I have yet to find anyone from any culture anywhere who can explain to me what that word means. Meaning, I know technically what they use it to mean. There's Pareve. Pareve means nothing in French, in Spanish, in German, in Russian, in Polish, in any dialect of Yiddish. It's the word they use to mean something that's not meat and not milk. I have no idea why. No one knows what language the word is originally from. Every word comes from somewhere, right? Huh? No, maybe if he's still alive and he's still giving that Petik I would email him. I'd be curious to see what the source is. And not only that, you don't find it in the poskim. It's not like the Rama says, if it's not meat, it's not milk, it's parve. He doesn't make any mention. He says it's ma'achal cholev, ma'achal basar, or it's just nothing. So they use in modern Hebrew. They try to encourage the use of the word tzimchi, or it's funny, like not milk, not meat, so it comes from plants. I still never found an etymology for the word, and it bothers me as a student of linguistics. But anyway, the idea of having dishes that are parve is a relatively novel one. It's relatively new. Why? Because technically, according to Halakhah, it's probably not necessary. Why do I say this? Well, we have a couple of important halakhic rules. We're probably not going to get through all this tonight. But there are two really crucial ones that you need to know if you have a kitchen and you do any cooking on your own. They're especially crucial if you're a Rav. You get these questions all the time. Yes. So when you cook something, let's assume I cook meat in a particular pot or a particular pan.
Good assumption.
Happens every so often. And you have effectively, in modern parlance, you've rendered the pot bisari. Because you cooked meat in it, it now has the taste of meat associated with it, taste of basar. So this would be true even if I cleaned it until I wait 24 hours. I have to clean it and then wait 24 hours. And then what happens after 24 hours? Well, assuming I removed the meat from the pot, I cleaned it, let's say I scrubbed it with a sponge, then what was absorbed into the pot itself after 24 hours is referred to as noten ta'am lifgam. Right? Pigam in Hebrew means a defect. The world's full of them. Don't get me started. But when it comes to food, we're talking about either a constructive, productive kind of taste or a nasty taste that produces nothing positive. So we mentioned 2 weeks ago, whatever is a surah to eat according to the Torah, it's a surah because it has some kind of taste or flavor associated with it. And if it didn't have a taste or a flavor, it wouldn't be a surah. What's the one and only one exception to that rule? You'd have to have been through Masechet Chulin in order to know this. One exception in the entire Torah of something that has no taste and it's nonetheless a surah. There's only one example of this.
There's no taste and what?
No taste and it's a surah nonetheless.
To eat?
It's a surah to eat, yes. It is explicitly a surah midoraita.
Blood?
Or fat?
Or
gelatin?
Okay, gelatin in theory, except the gelatin, most of the poskim agree that it's mutar because it has no taste. And also because it was denatured and actually toxic at a few stages of the production. So
Blood is
it's been pulverized, it was dried, they had calcium carbonate to it, and they take it out. So blood has a flavor, morsia, sure, what blood sausage. Boudin noir, you're laughing. Why, they don't eat it in France? Boudin noir. Same concept. So the one and only one interdiction that has no taste or flavor associated with it, the Gemara says explicitly it has no taste no matter what you do to it, still it's a surah to eat it, Gidan Hashem.
Really?
Gidan Hashem. The Gemara says, En begidin b'noten ta'am.
Yeah, but we never know because we never taste it.
Go ahead and try it, tough guy. Tell me how you do. That's it. It has no flavor, no taste, nothing. In fact, if you cook it, it doesn't reduce. It doesn't collapse into gelatin. It makes nothing. It makes absolutely nothing. No flavor, no taste, nothing. And still it's a surah. Gidan Hashem, the sciatic nerve. So I deal with these things on a daily basis. They're fun to play with. Make a lasso, but at the end of the day, there's no taste associated with it. The Gemara says this is the exception. The Torah tells us this is a surah. It's a surah for you to eat it. The fact that it has no flavor associated with it is exceptional because every other surah has some kind of a taste to it. So it's forbidden for you. Maybe the other exception might be water from Avodah Zarah. Like it's asur to use water they use for baptisms in order to drink or what. But that's only because someone did something to it that renders it asur, not because in and of itself it has its own flavor. So the Gemara makes an assumption like this: when you cook milk or meat in a pot or a pan, some of the flavor is exuded into the pot or the pan, and this would continue to be the case for 24 hours. Once you've cleaned it and you let it sit for 24 hours after it's clean, there is no such flavor. Now, the Gemara itself acknowledges that we're better off not cooking milk and meat in the same pot, but in the event that I made a mistake, you have to understand already it's not asur. It's not recommended, it's not asur.
Does this also apply to if, say, something pork was cooked in a pot and then you cleaned it in there?
The same concept would apply.
Does that apply also to milk and meat? Let's say
milk and meat is actually easier because milk and meat they're both permissible. Pork is asur; it will never be well. Maybe there's an expression like this that maybe when at some point in the future pork might revert back to being a kosher animal, but maybe that's more allegorical, referring to certain members of certain nations, etc. But it's not actually a joke. At any rate, if you take something that's inherently asur, so by definition what's absorbed into my pot is asur. If I cooked meat in a pot, so the meat is not asur, it's just meat. Anything I cook afterwards is going to have a status we'll discuss in a second. But if I cooked meat in the pot and then I cleaned it, let it sit for 24 hours, and I went ahead and I cooked milk in it, I didn't actually ever mix milk and meat. If anything, it was the residual taste, and it was after 24 hours, so they're both permissible tastes. It's only if I technically mix them and cook them together, I'd have a bigger problem. So we're strict when it comes to milk and meat, meaning even this probably not necessary, the Gemara admits, but we try to be careful. What happens if I'm careful but not super careful? I cooked meat in a pot, and then I used this pot, after I was done, I cleaned it, and I used it to make rice. Am I allowed to have this rice with yogurt? The Gemara says, called this kutaha bavli. The Iraqis used to eat like this. Rice with yogurt.
I was told you're not sari for eating it, but you shouldn't eat it at a dairy meal because it's just...
So Rav Ovadia Yosef permits this lechatchila.
Even
there is no interdiction. There is no interdiction, according to Rav Ovadia, to take a meat pot, cook rice, and then have something dairy along with it.
Even if the
that's not asur.
Even if the pot was used within 24 hours.
Even if, well, again, it's going to be noten ta'am, bar noten ta'am, dehetiran. It's not that it's asur. If I had a pot that I used for my housekeeper, and again, for argument's sake, her name is Consuela. Consuela takes a pot that I used to cook meat, and she says, I'm going to cook my meat here too, and she cooks puerco. So now my pot has this forbidden taste associated with it. If I cook something else in it, in theory, it may have absorbed some kind of a flavor from whatever was forbidden that I cooked into it. That's not the case with meat. The meat was mutar, the milk is mutar. I didn't cook them together. Okay? There is a neutral third party here, and that's the rice. As a matter of fact, it's even easier, and I'll explain to you in a second why, but let's assume I took a pot in which I usually cook meat, I cooked rice in it, now I want to eat this rice with cheese or with milk. So we're actually saved by a few different levels of hitter here. I know this sounds like, I love this look that I get. He's a reformed rabbi. I'm not eating his It's an excellent question. I have no idea what that means. Dairy equipment. They write DE, right? Or I've never seen ME, but I've seen dairy equipment. So dairy equipment, so what? What's the Halakhah trying to tell me?
It's like the rice, so it's allowed.
Okay, so I'm saying, what is the company trying to tell me when they say it's kosher but dairy equipment? Yeah. So what they want to tell me is I shouldn't be eating this with meat. So the question is, with this dairy equipment, it's used for hot, it's used for cold. What's the percentage? How long has it been since then? Probably for 10 different reasons. There's no issue at all. And in theory, I could eat this along with meat. They want to be strict. Okay, the Ashkenazim have a custom to be a little bit more strict on some of these concepts. What Rav Ovadia himself permits here, the Ashkenazim typically don't, but he permits it in Chatchila. So this is a go ahead, do it ideally. I have a pot. I don't need, in other words, a pot in order to cook, whatever parve means. I don't need a Pareve pot in order to cook pasta or rice, in order to have it with dairy.
So for the Sephardi, there is no dairy equipment.
According to Sephardim, that is probably meaningless. Yeah. 999 out of 1,000 times, that's probably meaningless.
Only for pots, like plates and plastic and.
The only difficult question to answer is the plates. Okay, that's a separate din when it comes to kelim.
One second.
A little bit of a detour. I'll get back to the plates in a second because I meant to talk about that more next week, and we'll answer a little bit more next week on the nature of different kelim and what we do with them. But yeah,
Okay, I want to start with pot. So I cook meat at 9 p.m. I'm done at whatever. It was in the pot from 9 to 9:15. 9:15.
that's very fast cooking. That's
That's whatever.
He's never been in the kitchen for a day in his life.
I don't go in the kitchen.
It's medium rare. It's medium rare.
The meat is cooked before you even started. It's okay.
I don't know, chicken cooks faster. She taught me.
Okay.
If I'm hungry, she's in the next kitchen.
Filet mignon cooks about 15 minutes.
Okay, so 9:30 p.m. I'm done with the meat.
Okay.
I rinse the pot, water, whatever, soap. You're saying that same pot, 5 seconds later I can put it back on the same fire, put rice, no question.
So I'm a nobody. Who am I saying? Rabbi Yosef permits this based on the Shulchan Aruch, by the way. He didn't make this up either.
So why is that?
Let me-
What is that thing of 24 hours then?
I'll explain to you. I'll explain to you like this. There are two concepts that are crucial to understand. Number one is what's called noten ta'am, bar noten ta'am. So noten ta'am in Hebrew is it contributes a taste. So in the fancy halakhic terminology, not nuntet, noten ta'am. Noten ta'am, bar noten ta'am means it's removed by 2 degrees. So, simple case. I take a steak, I'm frying it in a pan. Okay? I fry it on one side, fry it on the other side, I take it off, it's ready to go. I rest it a little bit, put some aluminum over it. But the general idea is that you cook it, you're done cooking. Fair enough. The meat contributed some kind of a flavor into the pot. Okay? And this flavor will then be contributed back into whatever it is that I cook in it. So if I take a pan and I use it to fry meat, I'm not going to use the same pan, even after I cleaned it, in order to fry an omelet with cheese. In theory. Even this is a way to permit this. So why would this be? Because there's a flavor exuded by the meat. The flavor is going to be exuded back into whatever it is that I cook into it. What happens if it's removed by 3 steps? And let me give you an example of this. What happens if I'm frying a steak, okay, on my pan? I can take out the steak, I clean it, then I fill the pot with water, and then I put in potatoes. So I have the steak into the pot into the water into the potatoes. This is noten ta'am, bar noten ta'am, bar noten ta'am. This is already 3 steps removed.
Well, what's the third step? The water.
The water and then the potatoes.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not frying the potatoes directly on the
It's
pan.
the medium. The water is the medium.
So it's reduced by 1 more step. It's distant by 1 more step.
Although they still
Okay.
touch the walls of the pot, and they're not just going to float in the water.
The majority of it isn't, we go by the majority. Make life simple. So if this is the case, then this taste has been removed by 3 steps. Okay? So it's one thing if I want to cook milk inside, meat inside milk, that's direct. One influences the other. We take an extra step of precaution. So for me to cook steak on a pan, and then to use the same pan to fry something with cheese in it, I would say, Tov, noten ta'am bar noten ta'am. It's direct, it's right away, it's too quick. If I have something else in the middle, something else in between, already it's not that big a deal. Another example Rabbi Avidan gives, by the way, and here he considers the oil to be the medium, to be the intermediary, is that if I take a pan that I usually use in order to fry meat, okay, my special steak pan, and I decide on this steak pan to put some oil and then to fry some eggs, it's mutar for me to put cheese on these eggs.
So why do we need 2 sets of?
She's all the dollar signs.
So right, so my response would be 2 sets of dishes or of pots or of pans is already, it's a nice humra. Really, there is such a thing in the Mishnah. Discussion if that means in the same 24 hours, even in general. So fine, even in the times of Hazal, it's possible we had a pot for meat and a pot for milk. Do I need a third one for Pareve is the question.
But you said if I wait 24 hours, no problem.
Let's assume we don't want people to forget or to make mistakes. 24 hours, I don't have the time, I only have 1 pot. At New York City, I can barely fit 1 pot in my kitchen, so okay. I have 1. If I use it 24 hours before or after, I don't want to cut it so close. So I have 1 pot for meat, 1 pot for milk. Do I need a third pot in order to cook things that are Pareve? I want to fry fish.
It depends if there's a third medium. If it's the 10 down times 3, basically.
So here, Ravadi tells you that anything that you fry in oil is already considered
Right. So assuming that there's an intermediary between the first material and the second material, so that it's 3 steps, you don't.
In theory, we don't. Make life simple. We don't. If I want to cook pasta or rice and to be able to serve it at a meal that's either basari or halabi, in contrast to the general use of this particular pot, I'm within my rights to do it. According to Rabbi Avidan Elkin.
What if you want to
If you want to be strict, you want to be mahmir, you can go ahead and be mahmir. That's up to you. It's worth noting that the Ashkenazim are generally more strict on this. In other words, they might permit it b'di'abad, but we permit l'chatchila. We would say, ideally, there's no issue with this. Again, I'm not saying cook milk and meat in the same pot, but if you're cooking something neutral, you would then be permitted to eat it along with either milk or meat, because it's already removed by at least 2 steps, probably 3. And for argument's sake, and Rav Adja holds this way, you're permitted to use oil as an intermediary, as that middle step. So if I fry my steaks directly on the pan, but I clean the thing and then I use oil in order to fry an egg, the taste will be removed by 1 extra step. Maybe it's more l'chatchila if I wait the 24 hours. I say, okay, even though the taste of the meat is something mutar, I'm not concerned that, no matter what I cook in it is going to be asur. And by the time I add cheese, not on the pan, but I add cheese to the thing afterwards, it's already not even cooking, or at least if it's hot enough to melt the thing, it's not like I cook them in the same pot itself. So I'm not concerned for the noten ta'am, bar noten ta'am, bar noten ta'am. That's basically what he's saying. Okay? Who does this on a regular basis? I don't know. I'm just putting this out there. There is such a thing, there is such a concept. Your oven would be a good example of this, because your oven, if you have 1 oven in New York City, you're lucky. 2 is just unheard of. I mean, unless you knock down 2 apartments and decide to make them a luxury condo. It's something that in one way or another, many of us are going to have to rely upon. If you have an oven and you keep the oven clean, and you're able to, preheat the oven in such a way, as we mentioned, I think 2 weeks ago, that you basically purge whatever was left in it, or you can put it on a self-clean, so you'd be switch hitting between basari halabi, wouldn't be the end of the world. Just putting that out there.
Or you double wrap halabi without having to go through the whole self-cleaning process.
Theoretically, you'd be within your rights, correct. Our ovens are large enough, there's a whole discussion about this, but in the end, you're relying on the Shulchan Aruch telling you that you could, as we said, in theory you can cook milk and meat in the same oven as long as one of them is covered, etc. And they're
At
not.
the same time?
Yeah, it's over here.
We'd been through this, right?
Oh, right.
And he didn't say double. You said single wrap.
Single.
You said
The Gemara doesn't require double wrapping.
Right.
Correct. There's discussion about what kind of ovens were they using back then. So if they're not dripping onto each other, they're distant enough that they're not really influencing each other, one of them covered to be enough. The Gemara, the Shulchan Aruch holds this way. He quotes this. Quotes the Gemara, it's Halakhah. So this was the whole machloket we discussed a little bit from last week, which is, do we have to wait 24 hours in between? So the Shulchan Aruch contradicts himself. He says one place it's enough that you cover one of them and you can cook them together. Same time he says, but you should wait. Rehamilta is the sugya. Is smell like vapors? Is it considered mamashut? Is it considered something real and tangible enough to forbid the use of the oven? Rav Adja holds leniently. There were poskim who wanted to hold more strictly. In the end, the Shulchan Aruch kind of contradicts himself in the sense that he quotes on the one hand the Gemara that says it's possible to cook the 2 of them together, and it's in there. Halakhah l'maaseh.
Which one's later?
And then later, so the later is Siman,
This is stringent.
where he says that we should be more strict about not using the same oven for milk and for meat.
Well,
How does
not even after, you have to wait 24 hours to
that's how it sounds from that sugya. He says it's good to be mahmir for this. It's good to be strict for this. So is he permitting this l'chatchila or b'di'avad? The intellectual gymnastics around the concept are such that it's best if you can wait 24 hours. We'll put it that way. Cooking together at the same time is one thing. If you can wait 24 hours, it would be better. Rav Adja's recommendation is that you do that. You clean the oven, wait 24 hours, cook afterwards what it is that you'd like. Although in theory, if it's covered, the problem shouldn't apply. Yeah, you're living in a small apartment, you're sharing the apartment with other people, etc. I'll give you another example of this. I can tell you that at the faculty microwave at YU, faculty microwave, I mean, I'm letting them use it, as well as the secretaries, at least one of them isn't Jewish. So they suggest wrapping everything that you put in the microwave. And basari halabi, it doesn't seem like so maybe there are people a little bit lenient with the microwave because it sounds like we call this cooking midrabanan, like it's biblically you might not consider this cooking the same way we typically cook. So it's hard to say the Torah forbids what happens in there. Microwave electricity and energy is not the same as let's say a fire. You could make the same case for an electric oven. Technically, the Torah doesn't talk about this either, but it's applying heat in some form or another. So our tendency is to consider all these things forms of cooking. When it comes to the covering, whatever it is that you're putting in there, it's covered. Well, the covering is enough to prevent it from being contaminated or from contaminating, if you can use such a term, applying to food. It depends on the food.
There's this concept of, obviously not, but times 3 apply if you cook steak, whatever, pan fried steak, and then you slap a fish straight onto the pan with no oil. So what's the status then of the fish if there's no medium? There's no oil.
You have a pan.
Steak on a pan,
right?
And then you go straight. You clean whatever, fish straight onto the pan without some food without any medium.
So here probably would recommend not eating it with milk or cheese. There's a whole discussion about Sephardi eating milk with fish or cheese with fish in general. We mentioned this a few months ago. Mm-hmm. That having been said, if b'di'avad you went ahead and ate it, you would probably have not been guilty of anything. What did you do? It's not tentam, but no tentam. We try not to rely on this exclusively, but in the event that you did, we acknowledge that it's mutar. It's not ideal. It's not the end of the world. Once it's already been removed by a step, it's already not considered cooking milk and meat together, so it should be asur. The tastes may only have mixed. If I added cheese to my fish off the pan, as I didn't fry the cheese in the pan at the same time, then probably we would consider it. Then what would you recommend you do? Is maybe not. Maybe not. But he considers the oil to be an intermediary. So
what other medium?
So rice, pasta, anything with potatoes that you typically cook in water would, in theory, be in the same category.
So the water falls into the same category as oil. What? I'm sorry.
Right. Oh, by the way,
liquids?
so hang on. Let me qualify this. If you're cooking soup, then the water itself is not just an intermediary that's transferring flavor. It's actually part of the tibicha itself.
Even if you're cooking the vegetables in water, it's not yet soup.
So you're cooking vegetables in water. Again, if I'm cooking boiling potatoes in water, and I plan on taking the potatoes out of the water and serving them this way, sliced or peeled or with the peel on, etc. So the water itself served its purpose, and it's no longer part of the tibicha. It's no longer part of the dish that I'm serving. If the water happens to be an integral part of the dish, like a soup, you can make the case for a ragu, for a stew. Then, if that's the case, then the water itself is only removed by that one step, and we would also recommend against it. So if I wanted to fry a steak in the bottom of a pot, which by the way I like doing because sometimes the oil jumps out and hits your clothing or your skin, it's not so pleasant. So a good way of avoiding that is frying it in a deep pot. But if you're frying meat in a pot and then you want to clean it and you want to use it in order to make some kind of a soup or to cook some kind of a stew, then the liquid itself is there. It's not being removed. It's not being used just as an intermediary. Here you're not going to be able to rely on the same thing to have the soup with Parmigiano cheese.
With the vegetables.
After 24 hours. You should wait 24 hours.
After 24 hours, you could then make the case for adding cheese to it once it's out of the pot.
Because that was my problem last week.
Yeah, that's it, exactly. So it's been used for meat. It's been washed out. Let it sit 24 hours. Here you can probably make the case for eating it with cheese once it's off the pot. The same way he makes the case for the fish. But again, people prefer not to take these chances. The market is what it is today. Pots and pans are a lot cheaper than they used to be, and it's easier to avoid situations like this. The real point of what I'd like to tell you is that b'di'avad, if this happens to happen in your kitchen, don't freak out. I mean, I know that we're all used to this concept of bisari chalavi or again carne leche, but the permissibility of these items is not so hard to understand. In other words, we're not cooking milk and meat together in the same pot. That's not what the Torah was talking about. Already, if I clean the pot and I used it for something else, at worst, probably not even midrabanan territory. But if it was midrabanan, again, distanced by one more step, it's probably mutar lechatchila for Sephardim. Ashkenazim maybe be a little bit more strict. Separate question would be: how much do Sephardim have to take into account of Ashkenazi strictures when they're cooking for themselves or for others? So there are some issues that are much more midoraita in nature, and there are some that are naturally more custom-oriented midrabanan. Classic example: Rav Ovadia holds this way, that Sephardim who eat kitniot on Pesach, even though the Ashkenazim don't eat kitniot on Pesach. So he says, look, it's one thing to say, I don't care about your customs, eat beans now, by force, like I insist. I don't want to offend anybody, I don't want to insult anybody. It's something that they customarily regarded as if it were forbidden. Does that mean that I can't feed an Ashkenazi family from the same pots I use to cook kitniot on Pesach? Here, Rav Ovadia says, no. It's not an isur, it's just a custom. It's just a custom that they choose not to eat from these things. According to him and his logic, there's no reason why an Ashkenazi should say, I don't eat by Sephardim on Pesach. If I cooked beans at a particular meal, you don't have to eat from them, that's okay. For many of the Sephardim, this is pikuach nefesh. What do you mean? I'm not going to eat beans on Pesach. Okay, so I'll have my beans, my bean dishes set out. I'll have one or two dishes for whoever is going to come and be offended by my hummus or my lima beans. And there's no reason for them to say, because it was cooked in a pot. So this is already going too far. Fine. You have other situations in which the suspicion is a little bit more midda ureta, like I mentioned this in the past. Glat versus Beit Yosef meat is much more complicated. That's actually a dispute that goes way back. And the argument was a much more serious one. So milk and meat and using different dishes for different purposes is already, again, the Mishnah talks about not using the same pot for milk and meat. Probably midoraita, it's enough that it's either not barnat, that it's removed by one step, and the tendency seems to be to imply that it's midorabanan, that we don't rely on that ideally. So I'm not going to take the same pot and cook, fry steak and then use it to fry toast with cheese. If it's removed by that extra step, or if it's noten ta'am lifgam, if it's been already clean and 24 hours have gone by, here it's possible that even midorabanan, you can make a case for with 3 steps removed of eating with the opposite use. And reading out of the Beit Yosef, feel free to share. I'll give you the same money afterwards if you want to quote this to other people. But why make life more complicated than it needs to be? There's no reason for us to, if you happen to own Pareve pots and you want to use them that way, you're welcome to. I said the minhag by the Ashkenazim is to be more strict on this ideally, but the Sephardim didn't necessarily accept that and need not necessarily do so in their cooking. I was going to move on to the topic of what's considered things that are spicy, harif, you're familiar with this. So kind of on one foot, there is such a language in the Gemara that when you cut things that are harif, spicy, everyone has their own threshold for what's harif and what's not. But my wife has disqualified me from judging my own products when I make something, if it's a jerky or a sausage.
Jalapenos,
Yeah, no, I need to get an objective third opinion. I'm not allowed to judge for myself. A little bit more tolerant of these things than other people are. So, what is the status of a knife that you typically use to cut either meat or dairy, and use the same knife to cut garlic or onions? Radishes are also mentioned, as is horseradish. Tamcha is the Aramaic word for horseradish. So the expression in the Gemara is that something that's harif, something that's spicy, meaning significantly so, it has the capacity to revive whatever tastes are lost in the knife in this case. Interestingly enough, these foods tend to be at least somewhat acidic, and so they kind of sensitize the palate, so you sort of taste a little bit more sensitively what it is that you're eating. Some cultures love onion, garlic. Spicy food has this characteristic to it. So the Gemara says when it comes to knives, be careful, the same thing. Now, I'm just throwing this out there. The knives back in the day were not made of the same metals they're made of today. Our metals are a lot harder, a lot more dense, a lot easier to clean and easier to polish. So it could well be that it was just very difficult to keep things clean, and that these residues were a little bit more palpable. Chazal could taste these things. And the nature of the materials that we use today is such that it's just not as noticeable to us. Incidentally, Rav Ovadia permits, before we close the book of the previous chapter, if you do happen to cook rice or pasta or potatoes, etc., in a not barnat situation, here he permits you to taste it, and if there's no taste of meat, you can go ahead and serve it with something chalabi. So, although we wouldn't recommend doing that when it comes to mixing milk and meat and say, go ahead, taste it. If you can't taste it, it's okay. when it comes to something that's removed by that extra one step, here we actually go back to the pshat and say, if you can taste it, this is not the case.
Just not not 3 times.
Here, I can read it out if you want from the Tosef itself.
And how are you going to taste the meat if you cleaned it with soap, with hot water?
So in modernity, it's not as big an issue. Here. Here. It's actually on the topic of cutting something with a knife that was used for milk or meat, and we're not finished with this topic. If you cut radishes or something exceptionally hard like beets, and you cut them with a knife that was used to cut knife within the last 20... a knife that was used to cut... It's been a long day, guys. A knife that was... I can deal with knives all day long. A knife that was used to...
Dream about that.
Dancing like the Sugar Plum Fairy in Disney. So used a knife that was used to cut meat over the course of the past 24 hours. Incidentally, the assumption is that the meat was hot. If you're using it to slice cold meat, charcuterie, for example, then there is no such concern. We're only talking about cutting something that's hot. And the same thing goes with dairy knives. Most of the questions that I get on knives that are dairy, that are bisari or chalavi, are no-brainer questions, because unless you're actually using this to cut something hot, it doesn't apply. Right. So what happens if someone has a knife they use to spread butter on foods? Well, if the butter isn't hot, think about that. If butter isn't hot, then you probably don't have much of it.
Then I can use the same knife to...
You can use the same knife for anything. You can use the same knife to spread liver pate if you want. What's the difference? If they're both cold, there is no such transference into liver pate with... She would come out of shiur tonight and tell her husband, you have no idea what I learned tonight. Rabbi Elkin eats liver pate with butter.
I was just thinking about the pate.
Yeah,
I'm hungry.
I happen to see went through some catalogs today looking for some product ideas. So some of this. The Germans have some good products in that category.
So you basically literally need only one set of dishes.
So wait a second.
That wasn't my question.
If you're cutting hot or cold.
No, if you're getting cold, there's no problem. You said
cutting cold, there's no issue. So if what you're cutting, again, unless you're using a knife to slice hot meat or hot poultry, there is no such thing as a knife that's bisari.
What's hot?
Hot like
150.
The Gemara says it's enough hot enough to scald the stomach of a young child. Like you'd be too hot to give a bath, basically.
I see.
So you wouldn't put your child in really hot water unless you were really mad. You wouldn't put your child in water that was. We'll discuss after we go. So let's say 110 degrees is pretty hot. I think 120 degrees is mighty uncomfortable. So if it's hot enough that it causes discomfort, even for a child, someone whose skin is more sensitive than yours, then we would consider this to be hot enough to potentially cause flavor to be absorbed. So your butter is probably not at 100 degrees. Your butter is probably at 35 degrees, maybe 40 if you take it out. Meat, again, you're cutting hot meat or you're slicing cold meat or dry meat. If it's hot, like you took a roast out of the oven and you're slicing it into slices, so this kind of knife would be considered bisari.
Bisari for how long?
So again, we would not use such a knife to slice hot milk. Hot cheese, I guess, would be the hot milk. I'm tired like Friday.
No,
It's Tuesday night and I'm Friday tired right now. No, I was sick. I said hot milk and I corrected myself. It was a long week. It's not even half over. So if you're using
24 hours.
If you're using it to slice hot cheese, again, it's the same knife. In theory, there's nothing wrong if you did this clean after 24 hours. We would still prefer that you not do it, observing what the Gemara says, that if you used a pot for cooking meat, you wouldn't use it for cooking milk. There's no exemption on the knife because there's no other intermediary. In other words, I'm not using the knife to cut potatoes that I'm going to use to boil in milk. That I can do. What's the problem? So in theory, to use the same logic, no, you can't use the knife to slice hot meat and then use it to slice hot cheese. But if I use the knife to slice hot meat and then I slice within 24 hours hot potatoes, I cut them while they're boiling hot. I just enjoy cutting things when they're hot. And then I use these potatoes and I put them in milk, or I put them in the oven for like a gratin, raclette, that's what it was in Switzerland, raclette. Yimach good cheese. You'd be guilty of nothing. You didn't do anything wrong. In other words, you used the knife in order to cut the potato. The potato is going to be, any meat flavor absorbed in it would be distanced by 2 steps, and then you'd be adding the cheese on top.
My question is, if I cut hot meat, for how long is a knife not able to cut cold milk or cold cheese?
In theory, cold you could cut right away. If it's clean, if it's physically clean, you wiped it like...
From a hot meat to cold cheese,
Yeah.
no problem.
No. Again, would you ideally want to do this? Good question. If the knife is no longer hot, the knife itself was hot and I used it right away to cut cheese, a different story. That's within 24 hours. But if the knife was clean, I used soap and water in order to clean it, then nothing cold counts for anything. It's not a question of 24 hours. It means nothing.
Even if something charif in between? So if you cut cold meat, and then some onion, whatever, garlic, and then you want to cook.
Then the question is on what I cut harif, not on the cold cheese. So if I cut onions or garlic or something exceptionally hot, so horseradish again, then what I cut, the Gemara says, would have the status of milk or meat. To the extent that if, let's say, I cut an onion in half, I said, wait a second, that was a knife that I used to cut meat, even if it was more than 24 hours, by the way, that harif concept applies. So here I can take another knife and just remove, take a slice off, take a layer off of it, and I'd be within my rights to continue to eat this with something chalabi, if I wanted to.
Otherwise, that onion is meat.
Otherwise, we would assume the onion to have the taste of meat, except, listen closely, so this is only 3 lines. So radish or something exceptionally hard, like barba, sedek, beets. Yeah. You're cutting radish or beets, and you slice them with a hot meat knife that's ben yomo, it's within 24 hours. So I use this to slice beef brisket. Okay? So it was hot, the knife was hot, there are no questions. So it's asur for me to eat this with milk or in milk until I remove from the surface that I sliced, which is about a finger. Take your small finger, remove whatever it is, a half inch, a quarter inch. Or I can taste it and ascertain that it has no taste of meat to it, in which case I can just wash it. That's right out of the Yalkut Yosef. So all of us have these books at home that were all written by Ashkenazim, like the kosher kitchen, Halakhah of Kashrut, etc. And this is basically telling you that, the Gemara has such a suspicion. So the suspicion is based on what? It's asur midoraita, like this is avodah zarah. If I happen to slice hot meat and then I cut garlic and put it in a dairy omelet, an omelet that I'm cooking with cheese. So Ravaji basically tells you, well, the suspicion is that Chazal are pointing to a reality. What's the reality? The reality is that when you slice something very sharp, very charif, it tends to revive flavors. So go ahead and taste it. And if it doesn't taste like meat, you could just wash it and use it. That's what he's telling me. Again, you're looking at me, I get that Reform rabbi look. So, I'm reading to you from the Yalkut Yosef. Quote him, don't quote me. But
why is it in this circumstance mutar to taste this thing that's charif if it's not mutar to taste something
milk and meat?
Yes.
Answer the question.
Because the thing is probably.
What's asur for me to taste and benefit from? The Torah says don't eat what?
It's meat.
Don't eat milk and meat.
Yeah.
Here I'm tasting to see if I can taste meat in my onion, and if I can't, then I can wash it and I'm okay.
And if I can
Hold
taste
this
it on my basari?
That's a good question. We have a separate discussion. Again, I don't even know if I get to this next week. That's maybe 2 weeks from now. What's called ta'am keikar. Ta'am keikar means if you use something to flavor something else, what's the status of it? So, for argument's sake, myself, Lee, and Shlomo, we opened a Beit Din. Zed Berkowitz has decided he wants to be the first one who gets malkot for my Beit Din. One of these recalcitrant husband things like that.
It's free on Wednesday.
So Zev says, okay, how do I get malkot from your Beit Din? Well, in order for me to get malkot, I have to eat a kazait of something that's asur. I have to eat, we're assuming large olives, it's a whole other discussion, but he has to eat, let's say, 27 grams approximately of something, 28 grams, exactly 1 ounce, by the way. Very useful standard to the British measurement. Yeah, 1 ounce is a kazait, exactly 1 ounce.
Not a lot.
So you want to eat 1 ounce of something asur in order to get malkot. If he wants to eat an ounce of pork, or an ounce of non-kosher beef, or an ounce of chelev, or an ounce, chelev would be karet, non-kosher meats, non-kosher birds, etc., it's all well and good. He wants to eat an ounce of milk and meat cooked together, also. Why not? Malkot. What happens if, instead of eating an ounce of something asur, he eats an ounce of something that has the flavor of something asur in it? For example, what happens if, again, Consuela decides that she's going to cook some kind of pork stew, and it's not an entire piece of pork that weighs a kazait that he ate, but he stuck a piece of baguette into the thing. So the whole dish tastes like pork stew, but without eating any pieces of pork, he actually ate an entire, let's say, 3-4 kazetot of bread that tastes like this. So this is a machloket in the Gemara. It's machloket in the Rishonim because the Gemara is not so conclusive. In other words, each one concludes his way, but at the end of the day, our tendency is to assume this is asur midoraita. So it's one thing, usually when I give examples like this, I give example of non-kosher beef. People have to understand that non-kosher beef is just as non-kosher as pork. You say pork, you say, I don't eat pork, Baruch Hashem, but I can go to restaurants and eat whatever I want. So if you have a kazait of bread that has now been dipped in this non-kosher beef stew, goulash, a non-kosher goulash, and you've eaten a kazait of bread that tastes like non-kosher stew, so do we require you to eat actually a kazait of the non-kosher meat, or is it enough that you ate something that's a kazait and that has this flavor to it? So we hold the more strict way, which is you could get malkot just for eating the bread. Even though you probably didn't eat a whole kazait's worth of beef, you could still get malkot for doing this. Back to the question, if something has the flavor of something else, something harif is a little bit more delicate, but we wouldn't say, for example, if you cooked rice in a pot that you used to cook meat in Shlomo's 15-minute steak scenario, then if you cooked rice in this pot, we would not give you the status of bisari. We would not recommend eating that rice with milk necessarily. It hasn't been 24 hours, it's been 2 steps, etc. But then if you cook rice properly, by the way, the water gets absorbed into it. If your rice still comes out mawi, as we say in Arabic, it comes out watery, you cooked it wrong. You don't have to be Persian to appreciate that you made a mistake. So you wouldn't have the status of bisari by having eaten something that was cooked in a pot in which you had meat cooked, etc. There is a question of taste. By the way, remember last week what we discussed? The different reasons behind, you were here last week, different reasons behind why we wait 6 hours after eating meat before drinking milk or eating cheese. So what were the two logics, two rationales that were given?
Length of the
Seudah.
duration of a seudah.
Right, so why duration of seudah? One opinion says it's because as long as you're digesting it, you're going to have these flavors mixed anyway, and if you have steak and then you have pizza, you're going to enjoy the flavor of both of them for 6 hours, meaning you'll be burping and it'll come up. The other opinion says no, it's more a function of having the pieces stuck in your mouth, and you can still taste this for up to 6 hours afterwards. So if the reason why we don't eat meat is because you're going to have the flavor, you'll be digesting it, etc. So this I can taste. If I have the rice and the rice doesn't taste like meat, why I didn't eat meat? I ate noten tam, bar noten tam. We don't go so far as to say I should wait the 6 hours between eating meat and drinking milk, that I would wait this long after having rice that was cooked in a pot that had meat in it that even doesn't taste like meat. If that's the case, that's fine. This is the dairy equipment concept. What does it mean, dairy equipment? Does it taste like milk? So maybe something made in dairy equipment, I'm not going to fry it with beef. I don't know, maybe yes, maybe no. But if the dairy equipment is meaningless, if the equipment was cleaned and they do enough of this, it has no flavor to it. The question is, why would this be asur to consume with meat? Because of minhag, it's because of a minhag. It's because it actually tastes like milk. Well, it probably doesn't. And if it did, then it would be chalavi. It would have to be labeled as such. Okay, your heads are a little bit full. We can continue from here next week if you'd like. For all the heretical citations, if you want to quote me and